What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the NerdBall Fantasy Football Show. I am your humble host, dendrologist specializing in the conservation of the endangered Robert Woods, and astronaut aboard the Pitts A Moon Expedition, Pete Rogers. And I am joined by fellow nerd, the duck father and runner-up in the great Russell Wilson cooking show, resident old man Clark Barnes. Clark, how you doing today?
Doing great, Pete.
Splendid. Terrific. How was
the weekend?
It was good. It was good. It might crop up from time to time on this show, but I lost my voice. My sister got married this weekend, so had a grand old time heading back out to Boston to celebrate that. Though it was a pain in the ass to travel because let me tell you, Clark, America wants to get back on an airplane and fly around the world now, but airlines and airports are not ready for that. The understaffed and just all kinds of chaos went down. So it was a shit show to get to and from, but glad I went. Obviously, it was a lovely time. So that was
well, we're glad to have you back here, and pretty good weekend of football to chat about.
Pretty good indeed, sir. Pretty good indeed, though I missed almost all of it. But that doesn't mean I don't know what happened because ya boy does his research. So let us dole out, Clark, some props and flops and reflect on what happened in week 7. Why don't you guys start us off with your prop?
So this one might be kind of boring, but props to Cooper Kupp. I mean, we are near halfway through the season, and I think Cooper Kupp is like the wide receiver 2, depending on your format, maybe the wide receiver 1. After 3 or 4 weeks, you could say, I don't know, maybe they're just scheming that way, or this will probably even out between Kupp and our boy, the podcast boy, Robert Woods, who's getting a little bit more involved. And just thinking like, there's ebbs and flows throughout even the short NFL season. But no, Cooper Kupp is really dominating this passing offense, just doing what he's always done, which was making himself available in those high leverage situations, but also now with a much more exciting down the field passer where in Cooper Kupp is proving that he can also be a downfield wide receiver. It's just that he rarely got that opportunity with Jared Goff. So just huge props to Cooper Kupp and his believers, because it's not a fluke anymore.
The victory lap that I would be taking if this were Robert Woods would never end. Instead it's Cooper Kupp, and it's both crushing that it's not Robert Woods, but also you're totally right. Like Cooper Kupp has more games in which he has scored 2 touchdowns than not. He has 2 touchdowns in 4 games this year and 1 or no touchdowns in 3. That's absurd. His production has just been out of this world. And it's just been, I need Patty, this is your newest assignment. Get on this to look at. I feel like this has just been an insane year for many wide receivers, and from a fantasy standpoint, because I'm giving props to Jamar Chase, who equally has just come into this year and has absolutely just been the guy for the Bengals and has put up just absurd numbers and absurd stats, and has been the most consistent based on our neck rating, our neck consistency rating. He's been the top wide receiver in that for the entire year so far. He and Kupp are battling it out there, but like it is wild to watch both of these guys just not have bad games, Clark. They're just consistently, no matter the matchup that they're playing and no matter the defense they face, they will always get you like elite wide receiver 1 numbers.
Yeah, it's been a big year. It was fun to see the Lions versus the Rams. I missed all of the talk because I don't subscribe to, Disney-owned sports channels that just talk about nonsense all day. It was a mildly interesting storyline because I didn't hear it talked to death during the game, though. Hearing the commentators say that both of these guys are really just ready to stop talking about this made me realize, like, yep, missing this lame discussion for weeks probably better.
Paid off in the end.
Yeah, good game. Good game.
Surprisingly good game. Many people, myself included, thought that the Lions were just going to get steamrolled. And actually, when we were flying out to Boston, there was a large population of people in the Detroit airport wearing Lions jerseys and Lions gear who are all flying out to LA. I don't know if Detroit Lions fans feel like are supportive of Matt Stafford and feel sympathy for him and are glad to see him like shine in a different team, or if they were flying out there to boo and heckle him. I don't know how Detroit Lion fans feel about Matt Stafford.
I would imagine it's a mix, but as far as the teams from the North traveling for their football teams, I feel like now that I have lived in the northern climate for a year and it starts to get really cold and crappy, like a trip to Florida or LA, well, not LA, but like a trip to Florida or Houston sounds like super nice this time of year. So hopefully they were just getting out of Detroit and having a little fun. Speaking of having a little fun in Detroit, I would much rather be rooting for the 0-6 Lions than the 1-5 Jaguars or Texans. Like, I don't think the Lions are actually as bad as 0-6 and
0-7. They're 0-7. They haven't had a bye yet.
Oh, well,
it's even worse, Clark.
But I have a lot of reservations about guys who, I don't know, they seem like gigantic meatheads and they have meatheaded their way to the top. And Dan Campbell, I don't know the fella. Maybe he's a nice guy, but he seems like that type of guy. Regardless of my thoughts on it, the Lions are playing hard. Yeah. And they're not getting killed. I mean, they're playing okay. And they're just every bounce imaginable has gone against them. Like Margaret Ford or whatever her name is must have not tithed on time or something. The football guys are angry.
Yeah, they're absolutely furious with the Lions. I think the key to that I enjoy about or if I were a Lions fan, why I maybe would be more supportive of that 0-7 is that you're just hoping for, like, we've seen plenty of DeAndre Swift this year. That's great. That box has been checked. TJ Hawkinson has had his moment. That box has been checked. Like, you need to get a wide receiver, but it is a team where it's like kind of close-ish, competitive-ish games, and you have Jared Goff at quarterback. And so there's like that room to think of like, all right, well, if we get the number 1 overall pick and we get our choice of whatever quarterback we want, like this could maybe we're a spicy team. Whereas like if you're the Jaguars, you're like, we have our quarterback of the future and somehow we're still absolutely sucking. And it's because our head coach is a doofus.
So take that, Lions fans. That's why you listen to the show. Only NerdBall is giving the Lions their proper due. You mentioned Jamar Chase as your props. Let's hear it.
Oh, I mean, just the fact that he's being incredible. Just the fact that Jamar Chase is like put together just absurd rookie year. And I guess I feel like we've started to grow accustomed to that with, Justin Jefferson coming in last year. Obviously Odell was kind of like, of this generation of receivers, the first to kind of like just absolutely blow up his rookie year. But I feel like after all of the offseason or preseason narratives of like Jamar Chase can't catch or Jamar Chase struggling in practice, like it diminished his value, I'm sure, in many fantasy leagues. And if you were able to get him at this slight discount, you are just reveling in the the stupidity of those preseason narratives, just because he can catch the ball. And guess what? He's doing it pretty damn well, as he's about to like set to break every NFL receiving rookie record that there is. I've seen everyone loves to compare his first 6 games to like the first 6 games of Randy Moss, and it's just out of this world. Like he's dusting those things. I'm certainly giving the props to Jamar Chase for being able to just like put those dumb preseason narratives behind him that were probably fictitious or pumped up for unnecessary clicks, and being the wide receiver 1 in Cincinnati that they drafted him to be.
Yeah, as far as the preseason narrative, it's not the media's job to bring you the news. It's the media's job to get your attention so that they can sell you trucks and prescription medication that you should ask your doctor about. Chase has looked fantastic, and I think more over Joe Burrow feels back, right? Like he has recovered from his injury and continues to deal. There is a 3, 4, 5 game window where tons of quarterbacks have come in and looked really, really good and then just fallen off a cliff. And that's, I've heard people smarter than me say, well, that's because they get
film on them, and coaches have time to digest that film, and then they adjust, and then the player's not good enough to overcome that. Well, that's not happening with the Bengals, right? So congratulations, Bengals fans. Gigantic win over the Ravens.
Over the Ravens.
Yeah, and Chase is absolutely a huge part of that. You kind of mentioned it, but a lot of the rookie wide receivers that we were worried about having really good starts to the year. Not on Chase's level, but like Waddle's having a good year, Smith's having a good year, like a lot of good rookie receivers.
Yeah, it's definitely been in the sense of like they have gone into their situation and have instantly been a vital part of their offense, with especially Waddle and obviously Devonta Smith. And we even saw Kadarius Toney throughout all the injuries that the Giants have had. Then of course the injury bug hit Toney as well. So he's dealing with his own stuff. But yeah. No, it's been a good, for all the hype that this class of rookie wide receivers had. They've kind of been, I mean, Jamar Chase has blown expectations out of the water, but the rest of them have like kind of been living up to it, which is great. Who's not been living up to expectations, Clark? And of course, this happens the first year that I decide I'm going to spend up for a quarterback in my home league, and I'm going to go draft Patrick Mahomes. That is the year that he decides he's going to throw 15,000 interceptions, and this Chiefs offense is no longer going to be this unstoppable force that it used to be. So I have to give flops this week to Patrick Mahomes, who put together his absolute worst game of the year against the Titans. The Titans have a terrible defense. How did this happen? How did Patrick Mahomes end with 206 yards and an interception against the Tennessee Titans, Clark?
Yeah, so I'm in a fun charity league hosted by Heath Cummings over on faketeams.com called the DFS Wars. And I suck at DFS Wars, but you said, or at DFS, but you said charity and DFS, and I'm all in because I'm just donating either way. At least this way it's for a good cause. Well, the Titans defense was $2,100 this week, and the Texans was the cheapest at $2,000. So I started the Titans defense and still finished 13th out of 16. So that shows you how good I am. I don't know what's happening with the Chiefs. They are not really hitting those explosive plays. I don't know if the Chargers showed people how to play against them, but it's just not happening. And I don't see any one unit playing really poorly. Their defense sucked last year too, so I'm kind of giving them a pass. I'm like, they're still not great. They're not the worst.
Right.
Mahomes has had some bad luck with some of the interceptions, but some of them are him trying to play hero ball, and it's just not working out this year. I have no doubt that Andy Reid's still awesome, and so is Patrick Mahomes, and that they'll figure it out. But as far as fantasy goes for the very short-term future, everyone's kind of down just a little bit. The worry scale it's starting to vibrate a little bit.
It's something there. Something there, which I will say, and I wrote about this on my week 7 takeaways over on the site. If you are in a league with someone who has Patrick Mahomes or Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, make sure you spam them with all of like the first take clips that are talking about how shit the Chiefs offense is and how there's no hope for them and how they're going to have a really tough schedule down the stretch. Like, find those clips, send them to those managers, make them panic, and then trade for those players on the cheap. Because despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes has thrown 6, 7, 8, 9 interceptions this year, he is still the QB4 in fantasy. Despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes has struggled, Tyreek Hill is still the wide receiver 3 in half-point PPR, and Travis Kelce is still the tight end 1 in half-point PPR. So while the actual football narratives are, this is a different Chiefs team. This is a team that is currently 3-4 with a losing record. And Patrick Mahomes isn't playing like this untouchable god that we have come to expect for him. Fantasy wise, they're all still putting up absurd numbers. And if you can convince people in your league who are rostering them that it's only going to get worse from here, or it's a bleak outlook, this is your only time to really ever buy a piece of the Chiefs offense at some sort of a discount.
Yeah, and I like the way you put that. And I think just super, if you're the editor or the criticizer, you always have the advantage because you get to go second. But the way I would put it is like, I'm still in on all of the big Chiefs, contributors. Like, if someone in your league is panicking and you can get Hill or Kelce, I would bet that they're gonna turn it around in real football terms, and like you mentioned, in fantasy terms, they don't need to turn it around. They're still like
they're still
absolutely elite.
Yeah, they're still putting up stupid numbers. Who's your flop this week?
My flop is someone at the other side of the coin. Someone I am worried about kind of long term is Sam Darnold. It's been a couple of weeks now that he's had some bad games, and not just bad games statistically, but games where he looks out of sorts. This might be a little bit of the like 3 or 4 game, nobody knows what to expect bit that I was talking about earlier. But the Panthers just really look out of sorts, and it's starting to pull down their fantasy assets again. Like DJ Moore is still killing it and just like suffering through these middling quarterbacks. But Darnold got pulled. I think that was as much of a mercy for Darnold as the coach saying like, the game's still close. If we can get like a spark, then we can still win. Because I think it was like
3-15 with 8 or 9 minutes left to go. There's already news coming out that the Panthers say Darnold's still the starter, but it is starting to become worried. And Darnold's a guy who I called at the beginning of the year of like, he's going to be awesome. And the first 3 games were great, but now like he's looked very bad against bad teams. And that's very worrying.
Right. He put up bad performances against the Eagles, against the Vikings, and then this week against the Giants, he was god awful. And you say DJ Moore is like powering through it, and he is, but like even still, it's been rough weeks for DJ Moore too. And so I certainly think that he's definitely someone you should be worried about long term. Darnold, that is, because it's one of these instances where like, and we'll talk about this later. We'll get down once we get to the our worry panic scale index. We're going to go in depth here, but missing Christian McCaffrey is really effing with the Panthers offense, as well as should. But like, I think that is now catching up to them, where last year they were able to kind of do it with Mike Davis and Teddy Bridgewater, but Teddy Bridgewater I feel like just a more confident quarterback than Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold, I mean, during his time with the Jets, man, he would go from really hot or making some really good throws to just like the famous seeing ghosts. And it seems like that is kind of back for him. He seems like he can get rattled, and then he's in his head, and missing your best offensive player, one of the best offensive players in the NFL, certainly doesn't help your cause. But yeah, putting up a dud against the Giants is never good. It's time for me to lose all faith into the Panthers. Every week when Jordan and I make our picks, I'm always like, well, the Panthers were pretty good those first 3 games. And now I need to start treating them as one of the shit teams.
They are weaseling their way out of that
new
young team that we're excited about making a run in the playoffs this year, back to like, oh no, they're still picking like.
But the thing is, this is also why this is also like, it's absurd, because on that hot streak, they like went all in and they traded for Stephon Gilmore at a discount price. But like this defense could be elite again with Stephon Gilmore there. And now there are rumors that before the deadline, Deshaun Watson's going to get traded. And it sounds like it's either going to be the Dolphins or the Panthers. And like that, it feels like the Panthers have invested a lot, and maybe they do try to get Deshaun Watson. Of course, as soon as they trade for Deshaun Watson and he's actually like in a place that he wants to play, I feel like the NFL is going to make a ruling on his allegations. But anyways,
well, something should happen now that we've mentioned it on the podcast. So about 40 minutes from now in real time, news will come.
There's going to be breaking news. You know it's coming. All right, there's our props and flops for the week. Now let's jump into the news. And we'll start with the big news on Monday, and that is Davante Adams being placed on the Packers COVID list after the team has been dealing with a mini COVID outbreak, the aftermath of their defensive coordinator, Joe Barry, testing positive. This means that Davante Adams is very unlikely to play their Thursday night game against the Arizona Cardinals, which first of all sucks, just because, I mean, the Packers Cardinals Thursday night football, that was showing up to be a very good game, and missing Davante Adams is going to throw that for a loop, obviously. But Clark, if Adams does miss Thursday night, which is very likely, how does that change the Packers offense in your mind, and what are some fantasy ramifications?
I mean, if you don't want anyone to miss ever for any reason, but if he does, it's a huge boon, I think, for Aaron Jones owners. Aaron Jones hasn't been super involved in the offense lately, and really hasn't needed to be. I think the Cardinals are getting enough pressure with J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones
who's also back on COVID. Yeah.
Okay, good. They're not going to have a ton of time. Also, like just tiny, like as a Houston fan for a long time, and when J.J. Watt was in his prime, really awesome to see J.J. Watt on a team that can make it, and he's still making plays.
Right.
So not as good as he used to be, but I mean, like that's just because he was so good, right? So anyway, that's awesome. Aaron Jones, I think, is definitely going to contribute. AJ Dillon, I think, might have some, like, if you are super desperate, flex, needy, okay, maybe. And then we saw Lazard kind of pop off this week. That is one of the frustrating things about trying to pick which of these Packers wide receivers is it going to be, because they're all kind of equal, right? Whether it's Lazard or, none of those guys have separated themselves really, and it could be any of them or none of them. Yeah. And so I would bet on Aaron Jones just getting work, and Dillon too. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. Lazard, he is 11% roster in sleeper leagues. So I think if we get confirmation that, and this call would come like Wednesday, right? So because Davante Adams needs to have 2 negative tests with 24 hours apart, which means like it is very unlikely that he will play Thursday. And so as soon as you get that official, like he is out, I mean, you can even go Alan Lazard at him right now, but he's had 5 targets in week 6 targets last week against Washington, scored a touchdown in both of those games. To your point though, about like, you don't really know with this offense, like all signs are pointing to like Alan Lazard would be the wide receiver to go pick up, but it's also like, you can totally see the narrative where everyone goes gets Alan Lazard, and it's like Randall Cobb comes up for 2 touchdowns and 100 targets, because that's Rodgers' go-to guy. We've already seen Cobb put one of those games on the table. So like I think that you can't ignore what the last 2 games have shown for Alan Lazard. And so I definitely think that like if you are Davante Adams manager or just someone who you have the space to stream a wide receiver, I do think that Lazard is worth streaming. But luckily Marquise Valdez-Scantling is still on IR, so at least he's taken out of the equation. But it does feel very keeping that like everyone's going to invest in Alan Lazard, and it'll be like Randall Cobb and Robert Tonyan who go wild.
Yeah, I mean, Lazard is the smart money
right
at wide receiver. You can make some cutesy arguments for other guys, but he is the smart money. But like you said, it could be like, oh, Robert Tonyan back from the dead, 11 receptions, 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dang it.
Everyone's like, yeah, sure. Of course. Totally. That makes sense.
Who didn't see that coming? He loves Tonyan. He was due.
He was due.
Next week on the Nerding Out
podcast. Yeah, that's going to be the headline. Yep. Week 8 takeaways. Robert Tonyan, he was due. Moving on in the news, Zach Wilson is out for 2 to 4 weeks. Speaking of have we spoken of the Jets? I feel like we did. We talked about the Jets at some point. I don't know.
No, we talked about another terrible team.
Oh, we talked about
I could see how you.
And also we talked about Sam Darnold, who was on the Jets.
Yeah.
Anyways, So he's out 2 to 4 weeks with a PCL sprain, which against the Patriots means Mike White came in and played, and likely he'll get the start again week 8 against the Bengals. However, the Jets just today went out and traded for Joe Flacco. So there's that going for them. I don't know what ultimately Joe Flacco did play with the Jets last year. He did lead them to an 0-4 record in the 4 games that he started. So Joe Flacco didn't really make a huge difference, but I will say that if Mike White is the one who's going to start for the Bengals, the Jets target share to running backs like went through the roof against the Patriots. With Zach Wilson under center through weeks 1 through 6, the running backs for the Jets were averaging 5.6 targets per game. Clark just sent a picture of what Google tells him Mike White looks like, and it is not the quarterback.
Yeah, Mike White is apparently the guy from Trainspotting who has a little accident. Anyway, sorry, Pete, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was saying running backs. So running back targets, Zach Wilson, 5.6 targets per game is what the running backs were averaging. With Mike White under center against the Patriots, it was 15 targets that that went between Michael Carter and Ty Johnson. So we're going to obviously get into more specific waiver wire targets. But when they come up with the news, I like to mention them. Michael Carter, if he's available in your waivers, you should be getting him because he's now the RB1 there. But Ty Johnson, like if Mike White is going to target their running backs, they like to use these two running back sets. They like to, use both Carter and Johnson. Ty Johnson is available, I think, in 10% of sleeper leagues. And he's a guy to go roster. He saw like 5 or 6 targets against the Patriots. He's a guy, if you're in a deep league and need a kind of streamer at the running back position, especially in PPR leagues, since a lot of his work will be in the passing game, that's a guy I like to go get too.
Yeah, I mean, if you've watched the Jets games, which I have, you'll say it can't get much worse with Zach Wilson missing time. Now, I'm always hesitant to say that because it can always get worse, but Wilson has played almost as poorly as Justin Fields has, and he had an off season and the full support of his coaching staff. So perhaps a couple of games off to reflect, take a little 10,000 foot view will end up being good for him. But I actually feel like an exciting move would be, picking up Crowder and then taking another shot on the backfield, like you mentioned. If it turns out Joe Flacco is going to get 2 or 3 starts, like as far as real football goes, not exciting at all. But you might be able to squeeze out a start of a couple of Jets who you just abandoned hope on if Flacco gets the call.
Yeah. Jamison Crowder, the man comes in and sees at least 6 targets every game. It's a Christmas miracle. My Corey Davis hype, man, keeps taking hits, and I am not here for it. Though he did manage to haul in a touchdown against the Patriots, so at least that saved his day. But soul crushing. Speaking of injury news, both Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders left the Raiders versus Eagles game with injuries. Jacobs had a chest injury. Sanders left with an ankle. Early reports are that Jacobs avoided a major injury. Plus, the Raiders have their bye this week, so that gives him plenty of time to recover. Sanders, however, has no timeline at the moment to return, though it's believed seemingly that the ankle injury isn't anything too serious. However, if he were to miss time, that in my mind makes Kenneth Gainwell the number 1 target off waivers this week for me. The Eagles staff has shown that they want to get the rookie involved, and they're trying to, they've used him in the passing game and kind of had him split the backfield with Sanders. So I like Gainwell's long-term value. If you need a streamer, then Boston Scott, who came in and was the bulk work of the Eagles rushing game against the Raiders. He's not a bad one, especially as they're playing the Lions, and the Lions can't stop the run for the life of them. And if the Eagles get up big, they're just going to run it with Boston Scott. But Gainwell played 51% of the snaps and saw most of his work through the air, caught he had 8 targets and went for 41 yards. So both of those backs I would be targeting on waivers with priority, but my priority is going to Kenneth Gainwell. And then if we get news that Miles Sanders will miss week 8, Boston Scott is a great streaming option.
Yeah, Gainwell has looked good this year in the, playing in the major leading role for the disappearance of Miles Sanders. Now Miles Sanders injured. I think it really benefits Boston Scott. Once Sanders went down, Gainwell got a couple of carries up the middle and fumbled a couple of times. And then it seemed to me as though Scott got a bigger role in the rushing game, and Gainwell was running a lot of routes as a wide receiver with Scott in the game. I do think, though, Gainwell is the home run hitter. Like, you could see him getting 15 touches and you wouldn't be super surprised. Scott, though, excellent consolation prize. If we know Sanders is going to be out for a couple of weeks, it is not going to be, I don't think, 70% of the snaps for Gainwell. Scott is going to play. They already liked him. He's already very good. So good consolation prize, someone on the Eagles backfield.
Yeah, no, Boston Scott, especially they have their next 2 games. Like I said, it was a Lions and then the Chargers. The Chargers also have a terrible run defense. That game is going to be closer, most likely. So Boston Scott, they might not be able to just rely on the ground game, but certainly for week 8, if Miles Sanders doesn't play, Kenneth Gainwell is going to, if they replicate what they did against the Raiders when Miles Sanders was out, it was Boston Scott got all of the rushing work. And against the Detroit Lions defense, he could be a really great streaming option for that week. Finally, in the news, 2 players expected to make their return relatively soon. Tyrod Taylor is expected to return to practice, and when he is healthy, start for the Texans. And then Michael Gallup has been designated to return off of IR for the Cowboys to add another weapon in Dallas. But Clark, great news for Brandon Cook's managers that Tyrod Taylor is soon to be making his return.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this makes the Texans, excellent, but for fantasy, all of those auxiliary pieces, we have seen that Davis Mills still needs some time to be super polite.
He had some good games, but he's a rookie.
Yeah. Tyrod Taylor was playing well and was making this, extremely not good team at least okay. And that was why at the beginning of the year, I said I'm not going to be surprised if the Texans win 4 or 5 games with Tyrod under center, because he's a good veteran quarterback who's still got juice. So him coming back, I think, is good for Cooks. And I think it starts to make speculative plays with the Houston running game seem enticing again, because there will probably just be more scoring. It's been a rough couple of weeks for the Texans. The only news they made this week was being a part of Scoringami, getting beat so bad, yet getting a safety that there is an on-field accomplishment worth noting.
That's their big win. Tyrod Taylor playing 2 games to start the year, and he still has the best rating, a QPI rating on our site from Patty's QPI rating index on the season. So like when Tyrod started this year, he was playing excellent football. And so his return will be wonderful for general Texans fans who like to see their team win, but also particularly for fantasy managers of anyone on the Houston Texans, because the tide lifts all boats, Clark.
Yeah. And Gallup coming back is huge. If somebody has dropped him, I would totally understand that. I don't want to keep him in an IR spot, especially with all the crap we've got going on in my rosters. But Gallup, absolutely worth a pickup. He is playing really well. There's plenty to go around in this Cowboys offense. It's going to be up and down. It's up and down for Amari Cooper, who is freaking amazing. It's up and down for CeeDee Lamb, who's freaking amazing. But Gallup gives not only the Cowboys another piece, but another viable piece in fantasy, where if you're hurting at wide receiver and you can ride the roller coaster, Gallup is very good. And we've talked about this all offseason. Next year, I can't wait to see where Gallup is starting.
Oh my God. Yeah.
True X.
Yeah. I can't wait for that. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what Cedric Wilson's role is in Dallas with Gallup returning, because he's still, even with Gallup on the field now, Gallup left, I think, in Tampa Bay in week 1. So, but even in that game, Cedric Wilson, 3 targets, 3 catches for 24 yards. So not anything crazy, but did have a role. So I'll be interested to see what exactly the Cowboys offense, how Dak spreads that ball around between those 4 receivers, since Wilson has shown himself to be a good target for him.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because in a couple of leagues I had Amari Cooper, and his availability is just, he doesn't practice all week and then he plays fine, or he misses the game. So I have added Wilson in a lot of leagues to just give me an alternative in case I know Cooper's going to be out. If I can make the switch, I'll definitely upgrade to Gallup there just to have one of them. Just
to make sure. Yeah. Because Gallup does feel like the guy who, if anything was to, or just, he feels like the more, the wide receiver better prepared to be the wide receiver 3 in Dallas. There we go. All right. Before we turn our attention to week 8 and talk waiver wires and the worry panic scale index, I want to tell you, dear listeners, about our Patreon, patreon.com/nerdballff. We have all kinds of perks for those who wish to join, including joining our staff Discord channel, where we talk football throughout the season, our starts and sits hotline, where you can ask us your most pressing questions and we will answer them to you at all manners of the day. And you can submit questions to the podcast to be answered live on the show. So if you want to support us, go to patreon.com/nerdballff. All right, we're going to spice up the order a little bit, Clark, and we're going to tackle some waiver wire ads that we haven't talked about first, and then we'll go on to the worry panic scale index. But let's start with waiver wire ads, and we've talked about some guys already, but one of the guys who I wanted to mention who we haven't brought up yet is Darius Slayton for the Giants. Now, the Giants' entire passing game is just a complete hot mess, with players going in and out due to injury. This week, with all of the injuries, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, they had one other guy who's out, freaking Kenny Golladay. With all those guys out, Darius Slayton, who was injured, came back on the field, and in his first action since week 3, saw 9 targets, 5 catches for 63 yards. If he stays healthy for the Giants, he is going to seemingly continue to be the number 1 wide receiver for as long as Shepard and Toney and Golladay are out. And next week they play the Chiefs, who still suck at stopping the pass. They rank in the bottom 4 in our NEF pass defensive rating. And that game, seeing how the Chiefs offense is playing, could be mildly close, or at the very least, it'll be the Giants will have to throw the ball to stay in it. And Darius Layton has shown himself to be good at, being able to haul in a couple really deep balls, maybe one of them for a touchdown. So the fact that he's seeing a high target share because of all the injuries and when he's on the field, I think that he's someone you should definitely go in roster. He's 23% rostered in sleeper. I think he's a great guy to roster for the whole season, but certainly streaming this week for week 8.
Yeah, he's popped and had some big spots for the Giants over the past couple of years. And, as much as it might be fun to make fun of the Giants, Daniel Jones is supporting a fantasy person. It's rotating.
Daniel Jones is doing a better job at supporting fantasy receivers than like half the league. So yeah, you can't give him shit.
So yeah, it's a solid pickup. And just because Slayton's been in the league at least a couple of years, and there's not a lot of guys catching balls for the Giants that can say that.
Dante Pettis had fantasy relevance last week because shout out to Patty, by the way, who had Dante Pettis as like a flyer in his DFS lineup last week. And Pettis, 5 targets, 39 yards, and a touchdown. Pretty good to have out of a guy who you just threw onto your team because you needed someone who was like under $4,000 to fill out your lineup. But I still, even with Pettis catching that one touchdown, 9 targets for Slayton is what you got to take note of, and that's Daniel Jones looking his way.
Speaking of site shout outs, the NerdBall staff, I think it was you, it might have been you and Nick, I don't know. The NerdBall staff was totally wrong this week, going on and on and on about how CJ Uzomah is definitely going to catch a touchdown.
Super wrong.
Well, he came too big with 2 touchdowns. That was a huge call, and like not just to get lucky call. Uzomah's had a couple of those games, and just good job. Good job, everyone.
That was all Nick.
Nick
okay. And this is why you got to go read the Nick's massive rundown that he does every single week, where he goes by game, and he talks about every fantasy relevant player. He had CJ Uzomah going off against the Ravens because the Ravens secondary, I thought they looked great against the Chargers. They did look great against the Chargers. They did.
Yeah.
And that's why I was fading the entire Bengals offense. And then Joe Burrow throws for 400 yards and just absolutely torches them.
Do you think that the Ravens defenders just get worn out with Mark Andrews during the week and they don't have anything left on Sunday? Probably.
I think they do that and worn out against Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown, who saw 14 targets and finished with an ADOT of 23 yards. That's wildly impressive to me that the average depth of his 14 targets was 23 yards.
Yeah, Ravens were in a tough spot. And while that number is big, not super surprising for the game, they were in desperation mode early. And that one is just really interesting to go back and watch. One of my favorite things about that game is watching Rashad Bateman's second game. They were right. Rashad Bateman is very good. And for a rookie, he's at least going to be serviceable, right? And that is a threshold that not a lot of 20 some odd picks get to. So super excited for what I saw for Bateman. More importantly, super excited for what having another receiver you have to account for did for the rest of the offense.
Yes.
Mark Andrews continues to kill it. Marquise Brown getting some really favorable coverages and deep targets now, especially just with Bateman being good. Other teams have to account for him creating lots of opportunity.
Yeah. Rashad Bateman, 52% roster. I know I talked about him on last week's show about how you needed to go roster him. 52% rostered and has seen 6 targets in both of the 2 games he's played. Now the Ravens are going on to a bye, still roster him, hold him on through that bye and profit because they play the Vikings. They play the Vikings, the Dolphins, the Bears, the Browns, the Steelers, and then the Browns again. Oh my God. The rest of the Ravens schedule is very juicy from a passing standpoint. So I am going to actually probably go add Rashad Bateman right now in my home league. Who's your top waiver target that we haven't talked about yet, Clark?
So this is probably not the most exciting right now. But Samaje Perine had another good week. He just looks really good, and the Bengals are moving the football. And Joe Mixon has had a lot of injuries in his career, so I think for me, Perine has just moved into one of those. If I have a roster spot that I'm not super excited about, I'm going to hold Perine. I saw a lot of movement with him in my leagues of him being picked up and then dropped, then picked up and dropped. So go and check. I think he's rostered in something like 30-40% of the CBS leagues. He just looks very good long term, and he's getting action even with Joe Mixon in the mix, and Joe Mixon already fighting an ankle injury and just looking unimpressive.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that was kind of, I guess, encouraging, or not encouraging, but just that gives the boost to Samaje Perine. Now, a lot of his production against the Ravens came from a 46-yard touchdown. Yeah. But what I'll say is that when the Bengals, when it was like a put away game, they didn't turn to just like giving Joe Mixon 20 carry. Like it was all Samaje Perine in garbage time or just, to put the game away. And so I do think that that's like with games against the Jets this week, week 8 with Mike White starting, the man from Transpotting. And then you have the Browns a bye, then you play Raiders. There are games, especially in week 8, where the Bengals could get up again really big on the Jets early, and we could see a high dose of Samaje Perine yet again. So I think you're totally right. He's a great guy to go check and see if he got dropped. I did this in my league, and I'm sick to my stomach that I did. But go see if Khalil Herbert is available in your league, because I dropped him because I was like, oh, the Bucs defense is legit and I don't want to start a running back against them. And then Khalil Herbert goes 18 carries for 100 yards and looks really good doing it. And basically kicks Damian Williams to the curb. So see if Khalil Herbert is available in your league.
Yeah, I tangentially, let's talk. We'll get to this later.
Okay.
On Perine, I think when Mixon got hurt, he showed the coaching staff that he doesn't just look good in preseason, that
he's worth being a part of the rotation at least, and that gives him a good floor.
And they like using him in the passing game too, more so than they like using Joe Mixon in the passing game, which is interesting. All right, let's wrap up with the Worry Panic Scale Index. Yes, listen to that despair. This is our trademark index, which scientifically measures how worried you should be about a certain player or a certain player in a fantasy matchup. 10-point scale, where 1 is you're on too much of a sugar high from all your Halloween candy to be worried about anything. 5 is you're walking through a graveyard at night and recognize the potential for ghosts and goblins, but you're not too worried about it. Or 10 is you're being dragged into the gutter by a razor-toothed clown demon who's fixated on eating your legs and seeing if your limbless torso floats. We've bounced between the 3 of us in giving players to talk about. I'm going to go this week since Nick's internet is out. And Clark, let's start off with a player, not just on a week-to-week basis, but on the long-term scale. What is your worry level with Christian McCaffrey, who has yet again, in the second season in a row, seemingly the Panthers have mismanaged his injury status, and he has missed a fair amount of time this year.
So this is a tale of two cities situation in my brain right now. And so I'm going to cop out and say I'm a 5 worried. On the one hand, McCaffrey has seen and sustained himself in a workload through college and the NFL that is just not something that you see guys do. And the injuries that he has suffered seem unrelated to that workload. It's not like he blew out his knee and he's continuously having like cartilage issues in his knee or anything like that. None of these injuries are compounding injuries. And I know intellectually and believe people and doctors that say injury proneness is not actually a thing. We think it's a thing, but
it's really not a thing. But then there's the other part of me who spent a first-round pick on Christian McCaffrey, traded for Christian McCaffrey, been so excited about Christian McCaffrey. He hasn't been there. This is 2 years in a row, and I'm starting to get upset.
I think that's a very good assessment, Clark. Yeah, for me personally, if I were a Christian McCaffrey manager, and this is, I feel like I talk a lot about this in terms of like how my strategy is in operating fantasy. I I think it's time to trade him. If you're a Christian McCaffrey manager, I would trade him just to avoid this headache of like, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? He's still like, there is someone in your league who still knows that Christian McCaffrey, I mean, everyone knows that Christian McCaffrey, when he's healthy, is a top 3 fantasy running back, who is a top 5 fantasy player. And so I think you can convince someone in your league. It's early enough in the season that you're going to get him for a bulk of the time. He's on IR right now, which you're hoping you can spin this as when you're trying to trade him, spin this as like the Panthers are giving him the time he needs without practicing, without, trying to rush him back, that he's out for 3 weeks at the minimum for him to get right. And so that he can come onto this team and start really producing for them at a healthy level. My worry level is like a 6 or a 7 in that. Personally, I'm just like, I think that he could come back and play this year, but I also don't really want to like sit around and try to guess when that's going to happen. And so what I would do is I would trade him. I would trade Christian McCaffrey for honestly kind of whatever you can get, which I still think is good. I think you can get good value for him, but I wouldn't want to just hold on to him and kind of try to have to play this guessing game about when he's actually going to play.
I don't know. I'm holding. I feel like there are times with investments and also investments in fantasy football where I feel like the point where I could have gotten value I would have been happy with has passed. And so I'm just committed. And if he comes back and kills it for the last 5, 6, 7 games, I'll be happy. And if he doesn't, I mean, I don't want to flip him for, TJ Hawkinson or DJ Moore, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I get you. Yeah.
Christian McCaffrey for DJ Moore. I would do that.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it's tough. You're totally right. I think if when he first left, when he first got injured and everyone was like, Chuba Hubbard. But the Panthers as a team themselves was like, oh, Christian McCaffrey will only miss like a couple of weeks. If you traded him then, I think you'd have been able to have gotten top dollar for him. But the fact that like he was on his way back and then got held out and then got put on IR seems like it's a little more worrisome. All right, well, I want to talk about a guy who has been playing really well, Clark, but has a really tough week 8 matchup. And we talked about rookie wide receivers, and that's Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle, with Tua coming back, has been really good. In week 6 against the Jaguars, he had 13 targets, 10 catches, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then against the Falcons this past week, 8 targets, 7 catches for 83 yards. Like, clearly Tua and Jalen Waddle, there is a connection there, and it is manifesting itself in good fantasy production. However, the 1-6 Miami Dolphins go to take on the 4-2 Buffalo Bills, and the Bills still boast one of the best pass defense per NF rating this year and have been shutting down opposing offenses. Clark, where's your worry scale in terms of if you were a Jalen Waddle manager starting him this week?
It's about a 4. Okay. I have been bouncing around with Jalen Waddle, and on my weak teams where I just don't have much at wide receiver, he's starting, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. I have a couple of really strong teams where I'm looking at him and Keenan Allen and just banging my head against the wall every week because like the obvious play to me seems like Keenan Allen, Hall of Fame trajectory, really killing it. Jalen Waddle, young guy on a 1-6 team, but it's been Jalen Waddle a lot. It feels like lately. So the Dolphins got blanked against the Bills when they played in week 2.
Good point.
So things not looking great as far as that goes, but it's a division matchup, and I feel like division games have the broadest range of outcome, and certainly the range of outcomes that people seem to miss most of the time.
Yeah.
So I think the Dolphins are going to hang in there, and Waddle is, sort of the last man standing, but also proving that he is uncoverable, and he is making some fantastic wide receiver plays. So I think unless you just have a cornucopia of wide receivers and he's like your 5th or 6th guy, I wouldn't try to squeeze him in the lineup. But if you've been starting him and relying on him, I'm fine with it. And I'll be doing it in a couple of leagues this week.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you're taking confidence in the fact that the last time the Bills played, they played the Titans and AJ Brown was able to have some success on them. 7 catches on 9 targets for 91 yards. And Julio Jones also had some good, he had 59 yards against them too. And that's not to say that Jalen Waddle is the same caliber of receiver as AJ Brown or Julio Jones, but is to say that this Bills secondary is not untouchable. And that, even the best fall down sometime, and even the wrong words seems to rhyme. No, that's not it.
It's good.
Thank you. I tried. But yes, I think I would be, because I do the wide receiver rankings on NerdBall, and I'm trying to think of where I would rank Jalen Waddle this week, and I think I'd probably rank him as, I would say, as like a high end wide receiver 3, so a high end flex option, maybe a low end wide receiver 2, depending on. I always forget about buys and like how having teams on buys immediately just like pushes players up the rankings that you don't necessarily think deserve to be there. But yeah, so I would say that like if I wouldn't confidently start him as anything more than a flex option this week. So I guess I would say probably I'm a 5. Yeah, 4 or 5. I think that's a good spot to be in, where it's like you recognize that it's going to be a tough matchup for him and that there's a potential that he gives you not a lot. But the fact that he and Tua have this connection and have been playing really well together since Tua has come back leads me to think that, this he could be a solid start and return good value.
And the comfort here is this is a betting on the talent play. The Bills are good. There's no doubt about that. But Jalen Waddle has proven he absolutely belongs and is syncing up with this quarterback really well. I don't do the wide receiver rankings, thank God. But I think Waddle would probably end up somewhere in the early 20s for me this week with all the buys. So we're not far off.
Yeah. Yeah. And he might be up there that way for me too, just given all the buys. I had him as because case in point, I was doing my wide receiver rankings for last week and I was doing them and I looked at them and I was like, oh my gosh, I had Jalen Waddle was my wide receiver 16 this week. And I was like, wow, that feels really high. But just because of all the buys, that's what happens. So yeah, cool. There we go. Well, that's all we got for you this week. Please rate and subscribe to the podcast and your podcast platform of choice. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at NerdBallFF. You can follow myself on Twitter at Peter Rogers. Follow Clark at NFL Clark. And of course, make sure you check out all the amazing content we're putting out over on the site at NerdBallFF.com. Until next week, my fellow nerds.